I also wanted to thank our current executive director and our president. And I wanted to thank Robert Schachter. Bob, where are you? Is Bob in the building? Okay. Our former executive director, Bob, who has retired after 34 years. Thank you. We appreciate you being here.
I have seen more caskets lowered beneath ground than I've seen caps and gowns. I've heard the heartbeats of babies aborted, had nightmares of the lives they could have been afforded, and I have known more fatherless sons than churches know nuns and priests, praying on the meek while laying on the weak, whisper while you sneak, make sure that pew doesn't creak, and I have seen backs turn to the truth to preserve a lie. I've seen backs facing the roof as brothers have died. I have seen mothers cry because their sons lost lives without a reason why. And the innocent plead guilty, and the clean appear filthy, and the filthy appear clean. Corruption is one heck of a drug. I seen the news give out information that is old. And I watched us all believe everything that we are told, but some of us care more that Kanye and Kim named their baby after the North Pole, or what to fear more, UFOs or GMOs, when there's not much of a difference because we're already clones. We're already drones. Our marrow has become narrow in our feeble bones with our brains attached to those mobile phones. The whole state of New York is a mobile home. See, you cannot stand still in a city that never sleeps. It's always on the creep, and you can wear a mask, but Ebola still seeps, and the weepers still weep, and the reaper still reaps. Have y'all stopped listening yet? Because I ain't even went that deep. I've seen the nameless beg for names, doing anything for fame, while the homeless, they beg for change. But watch us say we cannot spare when we pull off in our range. That's why these days they're snatching people. No more use in snatching chains, but cops and crooks ain't that much different. They just do as they've been trained. And the innocent are being framed, and reps are being stained, and lives are being slain, so status quo may be maintained, but the verdict is still not guilty when the bad guys get arraigned. So much for global warming. I fear this earth is about to boil. See, you've seen what it is like to be caught in lost toil. You can shoot down teenage brown boys and watch their dreams be foiled, but we cannot stand our ground if our skin resembles soil. And I've seen equality appear as only a mirage, and the media throws shade as the eager public is barraged. And I have seen us being set back by 2 Chainz, Trinidad James, and Nicki Minaj right back into the minstrel. It seems we've gladly delved. I've seen the support of exploiters as the makeup leaves the shelves. They don't have to dress in blackface if we do that by ourselves. And I saw a white man and a black man in the White House, and I thought we proved a point, but then they elected Trump, and that proved to disappoint. See, they will do what they can to ensure we stay upon. I saw more of Obama's puppy than of what was really going on, and they have us worried about Syria when they've been gassing us for years, making us think they gave us free when our freedom is their biggest fear. See, these days, I hang my head a lot. I am really losing hope, because all I ever see are 140 Twitter characters about some scandal between President Fitz and Olivia Pope, but I can only count on one hand my friends I have that vote. They really think this life is a joke, but I have seen death has no preference when it wants to take us down. And it really does not matter if our skin is white or brown. I have seen suicide seem appealing when I was emotionally gagged and bound, and I've seen drugs taking souls, leaving bodies to be found. But if we OD when no one is listening, will our dead bodies make a sound? See, there is a war going on right here in our hometowns, but none of us will see it if we do not look around. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. You're too kind. Thank you. And I've met so many people. By the way, the selfie that I did earlier is posted now. It is on my Instagram at Joyanne Reid. So if you were in that selfie, you can get that photo. It's very cute. I take good selfies. So Roya was amazing. Let's give her another round of applause. That's going to be a tough act to follow. I also want to thank Nzinga Christina. Thank you very much, our wonderful Mistress of Ceremonies. Give her another round of applause. And of course, I bring you greetings, NASW. It is great to be here at Social Work in the City. And of course, thanks to Candida and Julie for the invitation to be here. Your wonderful leaders. Give them a round of applause as well. So one thing I'm not good at is technology, so I'm gonna see if I can make this clicker work. This is not my strength, but we're gonna try it. So I probably should have made a prettier cover, but I actually kind of like it kind of stark like that because we are in sort of stark times. So we might need to not be too fancy and too pretty about it. What I want to talk to you guys about, and I'm putting my little clock on here to make sure I don't talk too long, which I also tend to do, is kind of the impact of the election on a lot of the work that you do and on the country. As you know, the election turned out differently than a lot of people expected. And what I do in my job is, and what I'm interested in most talking about is politics. And the reason that I think politics is so important is that literally everything that you care about, everything that you want to advance in a society, everything you care about socially is politics, is driven by politics. Politics is how you implement the things that you care about. And the politics of the United States is a very particular kind and has moved in a very particular direction. So let's start off talking about the parties. And this is something you probably already know, but I love it as a setup because I am a history geek, and so I always geek out on history, so you'll have to indulge me just a moment with this. And of course, let's talk about the Democratic Party. Now, this is not a partisan presentation, it's just a presentation of fact because the two parties have starkly different visions for the way that the social compact should work, so it's important that we understand them. So the Democratic Party, of course, founded by two Southern planters, two slaveholders, Thomas Jefferson, whose Democratic Republican Party was the basis of the Democratic Party, and of course Andrew Jackson, who our current president has a lot of reverence for, and he actually founded the Democratic Party. It's America's oldest existing party. And it was essentially a party that was founded to be a white party, to be the party of the white Southern planter class, and later of US-born white Americans and white immigrants. But now, the Democratic Party is fundamentally the party of cosmopolitan white voters and people of color. Of course, you know, the Republican Party, we know, was founded in 1854 in a little schoolhouse in Ripon, Wisconsin. And it was originally the outgrowth of what was called the anti-Nebraska movement, meaning the movement that opposed the spread of slavery into the newly acquired territories in what would become the Midwest. Republican was just suggested as a new name for the party that was fundamentally an anti-slavery liberal party. Grew out of the Whigs and other movements that were considered a more liberal. Abraham Lincoln, the first of 19 Republican presidents. But now that once liberal party is the party that was the cosmopolitan sort of white party, is now the party of white conservative Southerners and the white working class. So all the founders of these parties would be kind of shocked by the way they are today, because they're completely the opposite, both of them. So the 2016 election was a true watershed. And in the wake of that election, the Democratic Party, again, the country's oldest party, finds itself more removed from power than at any time since it was created. It finds itself scorned by the very voters who embraced the New Deal, built the Great Society, and put their hope in the nation's first black president. Democrats are now thoroughly locked out of power in Washington and out of 2/3 of state legislative chambers around the country. This is a cool graphic. It actually shows you how locked out of the party they are and how Democratic control of state senates has changed since the 19th century into today. You can see that blue at the bottom is when the Democrats were a Southern party, and as you can see, the map just gets redder and redder and redder and redder, and the blue changes to red over the course of time, as Democrats have lost control of state legislators around the country. You can see it going up, and getting redder and redder and redder. This is kind of hard to see, but you can just sort of get by the squiggles, essentially, that the Democratic Party is becoming essentially a non-white party, and the Republican Party is essentially becoming a white party. If you look at that upper right-hand corner graph, you see that yawning gap. The red going up is where white America is going, toward the Republican Party, and every other demographic, Black, Hispanic, and Asian, is going in precisely the opposite direction. Today, about 1/3 of white registered voters identify as independents. Another 36% identify as Republicans, only about 26%, about 1/4 identify as Democrats. And since 2008, the share of white voters who identify as Democrats has gone down 5 points. 5 points from 2008, the election of Barack Obama, to the election of Donald Trump. And there's been a slight increase in identification as Republican, but independents have really gained the most. I'm going to come back to that in a second. When you add in the leaners, the people who lean one way or another, 54% of white registered voters either identify as Republican or lean toward Republicans, and 39% lean the other direction. And that represents just a slight change since 2012, However, in 2008, that party lean was almost dead even. And one of the reasons that so many of us who were in the prognostication business missed what was happening in the election is that the white vote has always been a very split vote. Catholics split down the middle, Jewish voters skewed heavily Democratic, sort of WASP voters, white Protestant voters went very Republican, but it was sort of a grab bag. It's becoming less and less of a grab bag. It's becoming a much more solidly Republican vote. Whereas non-white voters are going precisely the opposite direction. Fully 87%, 9 in 10 black voters identify with the Democratic Party or lean toward the party. Only 7% identify Republican or lean Republican. Among Hispanics, it's a 63-27 split, which is a little bit more spread out, but not by much. And among Asian American voters, it's 66% who identify with Democrats or lean and 27% who identify Republican or lean. And by the way, those 27% Republican for Hispanic and Asian American voters are almost exactly what Donald Trump got of that vote. So people are very tribal in the way that they're voting. What you are is how you vote. Very few people cross over. When it comes to gender, more than half of women are more likely to identify as Democrats, but really only because of non-white women. Compared to 38% who lean Republican or identify as Republican. Democrats have had a constant advantage among women. The current 16-point advantage is as large as it's been in many, many years, but somewhat smaller than the 21% gender gap, 21-point gender gap that Barack Obama enjoyed in 2008. Whereas among white men, the Republican Party has a 61-32 advantage. 61-32. It's larger than it was in 2008 when it was 51-39, and 2012 when it was 56-36. So it turns out that the most successful Democrat at winning over particularly white male voters, was Barack Obama. Among white women, about as many registered voters identify Republican as toward the Republican Party as lean toward Democrats. It's about a 47-46 split among white women. Leaned party identification among white women has fluctuated a little bit. In 2008, Barack Obama enjoyed a 49-42 advantage in leaned identification, and in 2012 it was 48-44 for the Republicans. And one of the things that people forget is that white women have pretty much voted for Republicans for 30, 40 years. The advantage that Mitt Romney had was this pretty sizable advantage. In 2012, he had about a 7-point advantage. The worst performer was John McCain, with a woman on the ticket, out of the last 20-something years. Politics is fascinating. That's why I love it. Democrats have gained ground with college graduates, and as less educated voters are moving toward the GOP. And it's interesting because, again, the Democratic Party started out as the party of the white working class and the white Southern planting class as a coalition. But now that white working class has left the Democratic Party almost completely, whereas white college graduates, of whom there are more and more in the population, a statistic I like to throw out is that after World War II, 8 out of 10 American adults were a white blue-collar worker, a white adult who worked an hourly job and did not have a college degree. That figure is now 40%. They've been cut in half. So you have more college graduates. And the GOP is now the party really of the South and of rural white voters. It's solidly so. If you go through this map in 1989, you can see all that blue at the bottom, which is what Democrats used to get. And then if you go all the way through these legislative chambers, and these are legislatures in the country, it just gets redder and redder and redder and redder and redder. Democrats are now officially the party of racial, religious, and ethnic minorities. That graph is really hard to see, but Mormons are the most Republican demographic. White evangelical Protestants are the second most Republican demographic, a plus 46 advantage, a 46-point spread for white evangelical Protestants between the Republicans and the Democrats. White Southerners, a huge spread for the Republican Party, about 14%. Whereas groups who tilt Democratic, African Americans, Asian Americans, the religiously unaffiliated, gay and lesbian Americans, Jewish Americans, Hispanics, all go sizably Democratic. And now let's talk about this whole issue of independence. In my profession, we're obsessed with independence. What are the independents going to do? I've always said that an independent is just a Republican who's embarrassed by the party. And it turns out my little saying is true. Most independents are essentially Republicans because most independents are white voters. And again, white voters are conservative voters, and a lot of them who are fiscally conservative, but let's say not socially conservative, or socially conservative, but not fiscally conservative, who have some problem with the Republican Party's politics, will become independents at a much greater rate than anybody else. White voters are far more likely to describe themselves as independents than black voters. 40 to 26 is the spread, or Republicans, 30 to 5. Hispanics are also more likely to describe themselves as independents, 44%, than Democrats, 34%, or Republicans, 13%. So this growth of independence is really being driven by everybody but black people, but mostly by white voters. Asian Americans has not changed a lot. About half of Asian Americans identify themselves as independents, 37% Democrats, and 11% with the GOP. So when you see those polling figures that show you Republican, Democrat, and Independent, know that the independents have very few African Americans in that cohort. It's mainly white voters. And I would argue it's mainly Republicans that are sort of soft Republicans. That's what happened to the former sort of liberalish or moderate Republican. And what that means for Democrats is that per the Washington Post, and Democrats have lost the white vote by a 60-40 margin in the last 2 presidential elections. In 2016, whites made up 70% of the electorate. So for the sake of argument, in 2020, Democrats would get only about a quarter of all votes cast if things stayed as they are now. They would get only a quarter of white votes at this rate. So to get a safe majority, Democrats need to get an overwhelming number of minority votes to get to about 50+%. And just the sort of statistic that people, that I like to use is that in 2008, the electorate was 24% minority. So Barack Obama needed 78% of that 24% in order to win. By the time he ran for re-election, the electorate was it was 26% minority in 2008. It was 28% minority in 2012. So by 2012, because it was 2% more minority, he could actually get a little bit less. He needed 80% in 2008. He needed 78%, in 2012. Barack Obama in 2012 got shellacked among white voters. And he still won by 5 million votes. So think about this just for a second to put a pause in my presentation. In 2008, Barack Obama runs for president. He gets 80% of the non-white vote, which is about 26% of the electorate, and he wins by 10 million votes. And that's despite the fact that his high water mark doing well with white voters was about 39%. So you could actually win an election that way. And he won by 10 million votes. 4 years later, Barack Obama's ratings among white voters had plummeted, and he got wiped out. He lost white women, white men, white Catholics, everybody but Jewish voters, basically. He lost white young voters, voters under 30 did not vote for Barack Obama in the majority. He lost every single cohort, and he still won by 5 million votes. And I think the lesson the Democratic Party took from that is, we can win elections without white voters. We can do that. And the answer really was he could do that. I mean, really, there was something. And I'll come back to that later. And I'm going to come back to that. So white flight from the Democratic Party has been absolutely real since 1932, when, of course, the New Deal really solidified the vote overall. Democrats enjoyed overwhelming majorities in both houses of Congress, all the way from the New Deal, all the way to the Great Society. And by the way, none of that would have passed without Democratic majorities. They could afford to lose 19 Southern senators and still pass the New Deal. They had to make compromises, take a lot of the stuff black people needed out and other things to get it to pass, but they could do it because they had these overwhelming majorities. But that has really changed. You see that part on the right-hand side of the screen as Republicans begin to really take over that vote. After Richard Nixon, it starts, and then it just accelerates and accelerates through Ronald Reagan, through Clinton, and on down. But Obama did something very unusual in 2008. And as much as his coalition absolutely was driven by young voters, mostly minority young voters, but young voters, single women, educated urban voters, it also included a lot of blue-collar white voters, it turns out, a lot of union members that helped him win places like Scranton, Pennsylvania, probably no small thanks to having somebody like Joe Biden on the ticket. He won Scranton by 26 points. Hillary Clinton won it by 3 points. Farmers helped him carry Iowa. He won Iowa by 9 points. Iowa. Hillary Clinton lost Iowa by 9 points. Obama lost non-college educated white voters by large margins in 2008 and 2012, but He actually won more raw votes from non-college educated white voters, because there's so many of them, than he did from African Americans, Latinos, and educated whites. So they're still the single largest voting bloc. So again, even if Barack Obama won all the black votes, African Americans are 15% of the population. If you do the adult population, maybe 14% of the population. Hispanics, about 15% of the population. That's 30. Asian Americans, throw that in, that's like 35%. There's still more working class white voters than them. So he did less badly than previous Democrats, and he was able to win. That's him holding up a hockey stick, for those who can't see it. You have to do that stuff when you're running for president. You have to pretend you like sports. He probably never played hockey. That was a stereotype, but I'm just guessing. He's from Chicago. How's he playing hockey? So Democrats, when they win elections, tend to win high-density urban areas. They win the near suburbs right around downtown. They win Black, Hispanic, and Asian voters, obviously. They win college-educated white voters, pretty close to a majority. They win coastal states, the Sun Belt, and they're concentrated in a lot of large cities. One change to that with Donald Trump is Donald Trump actually won college-educated white voters in a majority. And Republicans win white men, old, women, young. They win rural voters, they win the exurbs, the farther suburbs, they win the non-college educated white vote, they win the South, they win the Midwest, they win the Rust Belt now, and they're spread out over a larger geographic area. And why that matters is a professor named Joey Chen at the University of Michigan, who's done all of these models and simulations to compare real election results to hypothetical results if you took gerrymandering out of it. And what it shows is that Democrats are essentially gerrymandering themselves, and that actually holds Democrats back in terms of winning large numbers of votes in Congress and legislatures more than intentional gerrymandering. The efficient distribution of the Democratic vote is what Joey Chen writes about, and says that it makes it harder for Democrats to win no matter how congressional districts, state legislative districts, or state boundaries are drawn. Just the existence of these boundaries is the problem. Because of the urbanization of the Democratic Party, any sort of line drawing is inherently going to value the rural party, and that is the Republicans. Democratic voters are so inefficiently distributed, more so than ever, more so than after 2000 when Al Gore won the popular vote, if you'll remember the last time, by a narrower margin than Hillary Clinton did, about 540,000 votes. She won the popular vote by 3 million votes, but most of her running up the margin was in 2 states, California and New York. And Democratic voters are going to be even less efficiently distributed in 2020 and 2024 and beyond, unless for some reason voters who like Democrats start moving to the rural parts of the country, and that is why the map looks like that. Now, I grew up in Colorado. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. Brooklyn in the house. East Flatbush. But my mom had a big West Indian family, and the Caribbean people in the room will understand this, that when you have a big Caribbean family, what you do is you move far away because they have a lot of demands, right? So my mom moved way out to Denver, Colorado. No, she loves her family. My family's awesome. I love it, they're great. They were all in New York. She moved to Colorado, so I grew up in the Midwest. So I'm familiar with this, but a lot of people don't realize that when you look at a map like that, know that that whole center has almost no people in it. No, seriously. There's almost no one in that whole center part. You could be miles, you're in Wyoming, you could be miles before you come across a neighbor. There's just cornfields, there's nothing there. Kansas, there's very little population. We can't relate to that in New York because it's so dense. The Midwest would be like if this whole middle row got up and left. And there's people, but there's just not that many people. But Republicans have a map like that because the rural voter has a ring drawn around them that makes them very powerful because of the way the country was founded, again, by Southern planters who wanted the rural vote to be more empowered than the city-dwelling vote. Democrats get votes in every state in the United States. Look at Texas. They get lots of votes in Texas, Florida. They get votes in Arizona. They get votes in New Mexico. They get votes even in Wyoming. But they get them in whatever the biggest city is in every state in the United States. They get votes in Alabama. It's just that all the Democratic votes are concentrated in the cities. And so if you draw a ring around all the Democratic votes, no matter how you do it or how you redistrict it, Democrats are just always going to have less seats, less natural seats that they can call on for Congress. So you have situations where Democrats win the overall House of Representatives vote by millions of votes and they still get less seats, because of the way that Democrats are gerrymandered by the way that people who like Democrats live, by the way Black and brown folk and Asian Americans, by the way they live in concentrated cities, whereas a lot more white voters live in rural, spread out places with not a lot of people, but a lot of power. So Democrats are really unable to take advantage of, of their core democratic advantage, demographic advantage, which is that this country is becoming 2% more non-white every 4 years. The 26% of the electorate that was minority in 2008 became 28% by 2012. That's happening every 4 years. We get 2% more non-white. But Democrats have trouble taking advantage of it because all those votes are concentrated in a small number of places. Not to mention the Electoral College, which was built to advantage rural voters. This past election was the second time in 16 years that Democrats lost the Electoral College and won the popular vote. And if you add up all 34 Senate races last year, Democrats won 6 million more votes. 6 million more votes, and did not retake the Senate. In 2012, they won 1 million more votes and did not even come close to taking back the House. So who cares? I don't know how that picture of Vladimir Putin got in there. I'm sorry. Vladimir Putin, you're so crazy. You just snuck into my presentation. Let me move on past you. I don't know why he cares, but he does. Sorry, that just got in there. I don't know what happened. One of my kids must have got a hold of my presentation. You gotta have a Putin thing in there. I mean, listen, if you watch AM Joy, you know I have to say something about Vladimir Putin every week. So the reason that all of this matters is not really as a partisan exercise. It matters because race impacts politics, right, obviously, and that impacts public policy for the working class. And the two parties just have very, very different concepts of what should be done with the kind of people that you guys as social workers work with every day. The perceptions of poor people in this country are very racialized. Public policy that's punitive toward the poor stems from that racialization of the idea of poverty. When people think of a poor person, they tend to think that poor person is Black or Hispanic, even though the vast majority of poor people numerically are white women, in fact. Back when Ronald Reagan was doing the welfare queen, he took a story that was literally a true story about a white woman and recast it as a story about a Black woman. There was this white woman, a real woman, who gamed the welfare system and had a Cadillac. And she was a real person, but Ronald Reagan took that story and made that woman Black. And that sort of racialization of poverty has really been a feature of the way that the United States has conducted public policy since after LBJ, after the Great Society, which, by the way, was very emphatically and overtly directed not just at poor Black people, but also at poor white people. Because Lyndon Johnson was a man of the South. He came from the Southern old Democratic Party, the party that did the Southern Manifesto after Brown v. Board, where 19 senators vowed by any means necessary to resist integration. You know, it was after Brown v. Board that all those Confederate flags started going up in Southern capitals. They actually weren't even there after the Civil War. They were there after Brown v. Board as a symbol of resistance. It was a symbol of resistance. That was what the resistance used to mean. Massive resistance meant we're not going to allow the Supreme Court, these robed tyrants, to tell us we're going to integrate our schools. And so Lyndon Johnson, as a senator, was the only Southern senator to vote against that because he saw where the tide of history is going. I always say that greatness is not about always goodness, right? It's about seeing the arc of history and being able to see beyond the curve. So Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, was a vehemently racist man. If you read the things he wrote, he didn't like Black people. He didn't want them around. He actually had this idea of deporting all of them to somewhere in Africa. He thought that would be a solution. He would have held the Union together and kept slavery going if that would have worked. But Lincoln had a particular genius, which is why he has greatness, is that he could see that slavery was a system that could not last, whereas Andrew Jackson could not see that and did not want to see that and felt that slavery should last forever. So that is the difference sort of between right goodness and greatness. But anyway, I got off on a tangent. The idea of Lyndon Johnson's sort of greatness is that he understood that in order to sell public policy for poor people, you needed to make sure that it was sold for white poor people as well as non-white poor people. And so the Great Society was very much an anti-poverty program for rural America as much as it was for urban America. But over the years after LBJ, the backlash to the idea of doing things like Medicare and Medicaid, the backlash that still existed to things like Social Security was really ginned up because one party decided that the way to turn a nation against LBJ and FDR-style social policy was to make people believe that those policies were only helping Black people, were only helping people of color. and that those people of color were essentially picking the pockets of hardworking white America. That message, which was pushed after Lyndon Johnson, is why you have such staunch opposition to a lot of social programs by people on social programs. People who are on VA benefits, but who say, I hate welfare, right? People who are taking Medicare and say, get your government hands off it. But it's Medicare. Like that whole generation turned against the policies that help their families survive. Because public policy has become incredibly racialized and has become focused on the idea of punishment, on punishing the poor because people perceive the poor as not being them and their families. But public policy that seeks to marginalize the working class and the poor actually winds up being like a slingshot or like a boomerang. It boomerangs and it rebounds on the working class white voter too, so that in getting their preferred president, they may lose their health care. In getting immigration crackdowns and the wall and things they genuinely believe will help them economically, they may end up losing black lung benefits for their families, for their dads who worked in the coal mines. And so this trade-off of giving up public policy that helps you because you think you're only giving up public policy that helps them is a real part of our politics, which is why I do this presentation about the elections. But what happens is that when economic want digs into a society, the society actually becomes unstable. This is what's happening in a lot of Europe as well, because eventually people realize that they too are the victims of public policy withdrawal, of the social safety net being taken away from themselves too. And while people of color over centuries have essentially learned to live with want, that's not a good thing, but it's true. Right, if you ever meet anybody black, they'll tell you, listen, I have eaten pork and beans, and I will make them so good that you will want to eat pork and beans, right? When my family was broke, I thought we ate pretty good, because my mother would be like, we'll just whip up this thing and make a pork chop into a casserole or something, People of color get used to want, which again is not a good thing, but it's true. But white America has not been acclimatized to the idea of government-produced want. It's been acclimatized to the idea of government-produced rescue that was very focused on people like them. I think that was a lot of the alchemy in the election, the idea that people believed Donald Trump would produce government rescue focused on them. But if you don't produce that, let's say what happens, and you guys all work with people who experience want, what happens if that want spreads to people who weren't expecting it? You get instability. This is really hard to say it. Oh, maybe you can say it. So Donald Trump's win was really a lot about race. A lot of the people who've gone back and looked at it found that there was much more of a racial component than a class component. If you control for things like income, Donald Trump's voters were actually higher income than any other voter. They were about $72,000 average income. He won white middle class voters, not just the working class. And again, the white working class has been voting for Republicans for decades. That didn't change with Donald Trump. He just won what Republicans always win. He got middle-class voters, too. He won white women. Clinton got 51%. She barely eked out a majority of college-educated white women, but barely. She split them with Donald Trump. Education was also a factor. This is very dense. I won't read through all of it. Hillary Clinton won college graduates, but really only when you control for race. She won college graduates when you include non-white college graduates. Among white voters, of course, Donald Trump did very, very well, overwhelmingly well with those without a college degree. While race turned out to be less helpful, this is the yes he can, maybe not yes they can, as far as the Democrats' piece of it, is that Democrats were not able to rely on their demographic advantages. Hillary Clinton got 88% of the black vote, Barack Obama got 93%. Hillary Clinton got 65% of Latinos, Obama got 71%. Young voters, Hillary Clinton got 54%, pretty good, but Obama got 60%. And if you look at the other end of the aisle, it's not as if Donald Trump did so well with these voters. These voters essentially were the vanishing voter. And during the election, we were all looking at the vanishing white voter. What happened to these 6 million or so white voters who never vote? Well, they voted. This year, it was the vanishing non-white voter, because where did they go? They didn't vote for Trump. He didn't do any better with any of these groups than Mitt Romney did, but he still was able to win in crucial states. I have a friend named Robbie Jones who works for the Public Religion Research Institute, and he's done a lot of study on nostalgia, the nostalgia that white Christian America has for a past they believe was located somewhere in the 50s. And 74% of white evangelical voters, this is the sort of alchemy behind the white evangelical vote, believe that American culture has mostly changed for the worse since the 1950s. 74%. They're the group that is the most pessimistic about the state of society. 74%, 3 out of 4, think the society has changed for the worse since the 50s. 56% of all white voters believe that, according to the Public Religion Research Institute, my friend Robbie Jones. By contrast, 62% of black people and 57% of Hispanics say the culture has changed for the better, because of course it has changed for the better for them. When we've gone around and interviewed Trump voters, and this is whether they are on the lower economic end of the scale or even middle class, what you're finding is a consistent desire among all of these class groups to have mass deportation, to have a Muslim ban, to have an end to free trade deals with countries like Mexico and China, and to have an economic and jobs program that is economically nationalist. The issues that drove Democratic voters, on the other hand, were preventing Donald Trump from being president, was the #1 issue. Healthcare, preserving the Affordable Care Act, protecting Obama's gains, the economy and jobs, but what you didn't find in those electorates was the mission of electing Hillary Clinton or electing a woman. It just didn't really exist in the Democratic cohort. And so what you now have is a situation that really alarms and bothers me tremendously, is that you have an element inside the White House that wants to take all of these factors that I've just described and turn them from economic nationalism into a kind of ethno-nationalism, into an ethno-religious Christian white nationalism. And they're in the White House. Stephen Miller, Stephen Bannon, this guy on the end is Michael Anton. You may not know him, but he used to blog. There are a lot of bloggers in the White House. I used to be a blogger, so I'm not down on bloggers, but I mean, come on. Michael Anton used to blog under the name Publius Decius, and he used to write these really crazy screeds about how the United States was taking in too many people who he would describe as a sort of mongrelization of the country by the way that we were doing immigration. He's very against non-European immigration, we'll put it that way. Steve Bannon wants to rinse the Asian presence out of Silicon Valley. So he's not just concerned with the people picking fruit, he's concerned with all of them. And of course, Stephen Miller was a mentee of a known white nationalist when he was at Duke, a guy named Richard Spencer. Sebastian Gorka, who's the guy with the goatee there, has just been confirmed to have worn a Nazi emblem from his native Hungary. He is an affiliate of a revival of an Hungarian literal Nazi party. That guy, General Michael Flynn, who's with him holding up their books, lasted 27 days as National Security Advisor, but has a long history of vehemently anti-Muslim ravings, and was really pushed out of the Defense Intelligence Agency during the Obama era because he was seen as unstable and erratic and paranoid. And of course, my friend Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, I don't know why I say his name like that, Jefferson, who's named after not one but 2 Confederate generals, Jefferson and Beauregard, Google them both if you will, and who has had an obsession for decades. He was considered a crank. He was considered an absolute crank, backbencher in Congress when he's been obsessed with reducing non-white immigration. Obsessed. The only thing he's more obsessed with than reducing non-white immigration to America is marijuana prosecution. For some reason, he's obsessed with prosecuting people for smoking weed. He is obsessed with it. He once said, he said it was a joke, that he used to think the Klan was all right till he learned that they smoked weed. So what we have is a country where communities of color overwhelmingly support the social safety net, and they overwhelmingly support the party of the social safety net. Those safety net programs on the good side are very sticky, meaning it's very hard to repeal, things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the Affordable Care Act, because they're so entrenched in society. But they're also the targets of current Republican leadership in Congress. There's a zeal in the Paul Ryan faction of the Republican Party that Donald Trump has now picked up on to repeal or privatize these huge, important programs. ACA repeal was the first legislative thing that Donald Trump tried to do. He did it for 18 whole days, and then he got tired and went, go play golf. and the reason that matters is that the Affordable Care Act, while it overwhelmingly benefited more white Americans numerically, it had a steeper impact, a more profound impact on communities of color. There were steeper declines among people of color in terms of uninsuredness between 2013 and 2015. The Hispanic uninsured rate fell from 26% to 17%. The total number of non-elderly uninsured fell from 41% to 28.5%, reducing the overall uninsured rate from 15 down to a historic low of 10. Non-elderly Hispanics, Blacks, and American Indian and Alaska Natives were still more likely than white voters to be uninsured. However, their drops were just steeper than everyone else. And so you can see the chart here shows that white voters have an 8% uninsured rate, Asian Americans an 8%, Hispanics are still too high at 17, African Americans at 12, Native Americans are the highest at 21%, and Native Hawaiian at 7%. But those numbers are actually down from what it used to be. It used to be even worse than that. So if ACA is to remain in place, people of color stand to gain the most. 67% of non-elderly uninsured Native Americans and Alaska Natives are eligible for that kind of help. Nearly half of non-elderly African Americans are eligible for ACA, but they're still twice as likely to be uninsured. Asian Americans, 34%, and Hispanics, 33%. There's less that are available to have it because more of them already have it. But here's the reality. A lot of those voters don't have expanded Medicaid because they live in states that just refuse to expand it, that are just saying no to money that their taxpayers have already paid in their paychecks because they have racialized the idea of social safety net programs to the point where they would rather deny millions of their own citizens access to health care because of politics. In Trump's 100 first days, he has demanded Republicans pass that health care bill he admitted would hurt his own people, his own supporters, particularly in coal country. He attempted to institute a Muslim ban that was overturned by the courts, his ban was. He signed an executive order to begin the process of reversing the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan, which has huge implications for what they call racial environmental injustice, meaning that black people and brown people are more likely to live by a power plant or live by a Superfund site or on one. He's dismantling climate change protections. He signed an executive order allowing coal companies to dump into streams. And those streams they're dumping in are not near Mar-a-Lago, they are near poor people. Trump's administration has proposed a 25% cut in the EPA's budget, which would eliminate nearly 3,000 jobs in several programs, including the entire Environmental Justice Office, which tries to prevent things like Flint from happening. Funding for the cleanup of lead. The Freddie Gray case was a lot about a lead-poisoned child who grew up to be an adult who was not mentally equipped to handle the police, let alone socially and culturally equipped. These funds are there to clean up tribal lands, the Great Lakes region. Climate initiatives are earmarked for a 70% budget cut. The Environmental Justice Office is what bridges the disparity in pollution experienced by Black, Hispanic, and low-income communities. It is going to be gone if Trump gets his budget through. He revoked a 2014 Obama executive order that required anybody who contracts with the federal government over a certain amount to certify that they hadn't violated labor laws. Now they can bid for federal contracts, and they don't have to disclose if they have violated the Fair Labor Standards Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, the Migrant and Seasonal Agricultural Worker Protection Act, and the National Labor Relations Act. They can now apply for government contracts. He signed legislation aimed at cutting off federal funding to Planned Parenthood. Now states can do that if they want. It nullifies a rule that was created by the Obama administration, barring state and local governments from doing that, from withholding money for family planning services related to contraception, sexually transmitted diseases, fertility, pregnancy care, and breast and cervical cancer screening, because that's 99% of what Planned Parenthood does. So people may not be able to get their mammograms because of 1% of the provider services that are about abortion. He proposed a budget that would slash Meals on Wheels, community development block grants, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, bye-bye Big Bird, arts and anti-poverty programs, and increasing defense spending at the same time. He's proposed to exit NAFTA, which could collapse the economy of Mexico. And drive more people across the border. He wants to impose stiff import taxes on goods from countries like Mexico and China, which will make everything in Walmart more expensive for his voters. He falsely accused the former president of the United States and the former national security advisor of illegally wiretapping him. And of course, he's involved in a Russiagate scandal. Attorney General Sessions is now reviewing all of the consent decrees, all of them, that were formed either by Loretta Lynch or Eric Holder with police departments around the country. Those consent decrees were designed to reduce violence between police and individual citizens. Sessions is now reviewing them to see if they even want to stay in them, and has already proposed withdrawing from the Baltimore consent decree. However, the police chief in Baltimore said, nope, we're implementing it, and they are. And a judge backed them up. in Maryland. The deportations are up sharply, including deportations of undocumented migrants with no criminal history, DACA recipients, and parents of American-born, American citizen children, producing what I'm sure some of you are dealing with in your work, tremendous anxiety in communities of color, people afraid to go to the store, afraid to take their kids to school, afraid to walk down the street, afraid of being snatched literally by ICE anywhere that they go, afraid to go to domestic violence counseling, afraid to go to the police when a crime is committed against them. At the same time, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions has reinstated federal contracts that had been barred by the Obama administration with private prison companies. Private prison companies gave millions and millions of dollars to Donald Trump's campaign. They stand to benefit in the billions of dollars if we start massively rounding up people and holding them in detention for deportation. Private prisons are where they are going to end up. Trump today is signing an executive order, he might have signed it already, that's aimed at, quote, bolstering his pledge to buy American and hire American by directing federal agencies to probe government procurement practices and re-examine all programs under which workers enter the United States from abroad. Well, that sounds fair, right? Buy American and hire American. That sounds good. That's what his voters wanted. Of course, they're including in that the H-1B visas that largely staff tech companies in California. One of Steve Bannon's pet issues is that he feels Donald Trump even said in a radio interview with him, well, we want to get the bad immigrants out, right? We want the bad hombres out, but we like the immigrants in Silicon Valley, right? And Bannon said, nope, we want them out too. And now that is what is happening. These buy American, hire American provisions will probably hurt the ability to have doctors in rural America. American young people are not becoming doctors anymore. And when they are, they're becoming surgeons and other high-value medical professions because they can't afford to pay back their loans otherwise. So becoming a general practitioner has become a thing that we import from abroad. The doctor who delivered my firstborn child was last name Polavarapu. I had 1 out of 3 of my children who was delivered by somebody who was born in the United States. 2 out of 3 were foreign-born. And that is increasingly the experience of Americans, particularly when you get out of New York and go into rural America where they have no doctors, unless some doctor from Nigeria or Bangladesh or Pakistan is taking care of them, because their governments pay for their medical educations. They can afford to be a family doctor. Our kids cannot. But Trump did take this really cool Easter egg photo. I had to put something good news in there. Look at the glasses on the bunny. That's classic. Melania looks so happy. Did you guys know that she had a private Easter egg roll at Mar-a-Lago? You heard about that? A private one for really rich donors. Like, she looks all miserable at this one. They had a private Easter egg roll just for the rich donors at Mar-a-Lago. That you and I, none of us got invited to that. So Trump, I'm going to try to wrap this up quickly. I think I'm going way over. He's unpopular, very unpopular, 51% disapproval rating, average 41.6. In fact, he's historically unpopular. His 40-some-odd ratings are historic. I mean, George W. Bush at this point was at 61, Obama was at 63, Reagan was at 67, Trump is lounging down in the 40s. But his popularity really varies depending on what party. He's at 87% with Republicans. 87%. He's at 36 with independents and 10 with Democrats. 87% of Republicans think this is going quite well. It's also incredibly polarized by race. Donald Trump's popularity rating with white Americans is 67%. Those who do not have a college degree. 67% of white non-college voters think he's doing well. White college non-graduates who are in college but not graduated, 60% popularity. White male popularity, 60%. White male, white voters, 50 plus years old, 58% positive. Right? But when you go to non-white voters 18 to 29, he's at 17%. Non-white female voters, college graduate, he's at 15%. His lowest rating, black voters, 13%. But you can see there's a very big difference. When you say Trump is unpopular, you have to parse out who is he unpopular with. 67% of white voters without a college degree think he is doing very, very well. 2/3 of white men without a college degree, as I said, and blacks are the lowest. So that's a repeat. And there you can see again, when you put the racial ratings next to each other, how stark they look. Asian Americans give him 27%, blacks 13%, Hispanics 22%, white voters 54%. This is hard to read, but it just basically reinforces that point. It also reinforces the point that by education, he's much more popular with non-college than with college. And so the question is, where do we go from here? This is the blank part of my presentation. Because I don't know. Donald Trump is going to probably still be president in 2020 because impeachment requires a Congress that will do it. Democrats controlled Congress when Richard Nixon was impeached. There were just enough Republicans who said, we'll side with them, that we will form a majority. It took Republicans. Barry Goldwater went to Richard Nixon and said, we're going to impeach you if you don't resign. Who is the Barry Goldwater of today? Barry Goldwater, who opposed the civil rights movement, but went to Nixon, and he was the guy who said, you're gone. Who is the guy? Who's going to do it? McCain? McCain opposes Trump every day, but he still votes for everything Trump wants. Is it going to be Lindsey Graham? I love Lindsey Graham. He's very delightful, but he's not opposing Trump actually, just rhetorically. There isn't a single Republican who'd impeach Donald Trump today. Is Paul Ryan going to do it? No. Is Devin Nunes going to do it? Like, no. So unless you have a Congress that's willing to do something about Donald Trump, and not just impeachment, but even reining him in, it isn't going to happen. And so this is the part where I say where we go from here really depends on Americans who have to decide whether they want to empower the first branch of government, the Congress, which is the most powerful branch of government, really. And that is really up to voters. Only voters in 2018 can decide who should control the House of Representatives, who should control the Senate, in a sense, who will rein in or not the White House. Because we have a very specific public policy imperative that one party versus the other has in mind. And if you care about what people of color care about and what poor people, including poor white people, care about, then you have a really clear line of action. The question is whether or not Americans will take it. And that is the end of my really long presentation. We probably have time for like 2 or 3 questions, right? Okay, so if you have a question, thank you. I think if you stand up, somebody will bring you a microphone. I like to tell the story that 50 years after the Civil War passed, white women still did not have the right to vote. 50 years after the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments gave black men the right to vote, a country that despised black people still would not give their own wives the right to vote. That tells you what you need to know about American society. It is deeply misogynistic. And by the way, at the time that the Civil Rights Act passed, most adult women could not open a bank account or have a credit card. So think about that for a second. A country that was born hating black people hated their own wives more. That's reality. Man, oh, let's go over this, let's ping pong, so we'll go here next.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I had wanted to hear your thoughts on, some people would think that using the mother of all bombs and picking this fight with North Korea is a deflection to move away from Russiagate and to move away from your friend Jefferson Sessions and his communication with Russia. I'd just like to hear your thoughts on it, because I know some of your colleagues, especially at 10 o'clock in the evening, talk a lot about that.
I don't ascribe that much strategery to Donald Trump. I think he wakes up in the morning in like a foul mood, and he just starts tweeting. Honestly, he's the demographic that watches Fox News. He's 70 years old. He's a 70-year-old white conservative who watches Fox and Friends every morning and then gets mad and starts tweeting. Like, I don't think he's that strategic. There are people around him who are strategic, but I don't think he is. I think Donald Trump is a guy who admires strength. He admires people like Kim Jong-un. He likes to fight. He said that before. He loves to be in a fight. And he thinks public policy is simple. He thinks he can bully Kim Jong-un, who killed his own brother, into backing down because Trump said so. You know, no, I don't think it's strategic. I just don't think he is that strategic.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm so excited to have you here. Thank you
Come
so
closer
much.
to the microphone.
Thank you so much for being here. I have a question. Every single day I'm thinking about the millennials, and I'm thinking about whether they were thinking about SCOTUS. SCOTUS is my biggest thing. I'm obsessed with SCOTUS. Supreme Court of the United States of America. And so what I'm wondering, where were they in the elections? Do you think that the young generations, the 18 to 29-year-olds, are thinking long-term in terms of, we now have a president that put a conservative onto SCOTUS, And did they think about that when they decided to not vote?
Yeah.
What are you thinking about in terms of millennials?
You know, what's really interesting is that in the American tradition, it has been churches and religious people who've been the longest term strategic thinkers in American politics, right? The civil rights movement was led by pastors because they could organize in churches. A lot of the abolition movements sprung from both white and black church and religious-based movements. But after the civil rights movement, you had sort of a general withdrawal of the black church from politics, and it became a lot more about sort of different, sort of pecuniary interests in different things, but it sort of withdrew wholesale, although you still have great civil rights leaders who come from the church tradition. On the right, on the Republican side, they discovered activism based in church in the 1980s and have never let it go. They think long term. They vote literally on the Supreme Court, and they don't care about anything else. You had evangelicals who thought that Bill Clinton was the devil for having an affair with Monica Lewinsky vote for Donald Trump after Access Hollywood and say they didn't care. The death of outrage, all of that Bill Bennett stuff went out the window when it was time for Donald Trump. He won evangelicals more than any other group. He won Mormons who were supposed to be against him because all they care about is one thing, the court. And they're voting for the court. Getting Gorsuch on and overturning Roe v. Wade is their singular issue. Democrats have never been able to get their voters to think strategically or vote strategically that way. Republicans think about getting a school board person in so they can one day be governor, so that person can one day be president. Democrats don't think that way. Democrats have given up the idea of strategic voting. But I can tell you, I teach a class at the NYC annex of Syracuse University, and those young people, especially the young women, and these are mostly white students, and my female students, the girls, were shaken to the core by this election. They just took for granted that they were going to get a woman president after the black president. They just took for granted that the numbers said that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and nobody thought it couldn't happen. And now they're realizing every right you have in this country is completely fungible. It is completely easy to take away. Our country, we were talking earlier, we were having a conversation, we have the most resilient democracy probably on earth because it's built to sort of fight each other, to have the legislature fight the president, and we don't have a prime minister, for instance, who can be sidelined or recalled the way it just happened in Turkey, where the president of Turkey literally just nixed out the prime minister and the parliament. You can become an autocracy like that. It is completely fragile. This is a young country. If you've ever been to Cuba, know that Cuba used to be a completely free country with lots of hotels and nightclubs. So did Afghanistan. Go Google pictures of Afghanistan in the 1950s. There were women hanging out at the nightclub. There were fabulous clubs. There were movie theaters. They loved Hollywood movies. It can go like that. And Americans just aren't thinking clearly when they think we can just elect anyone, it doesn't matter. So I think now Americans are awake to the idea that you could lose this country, you could lose the freedoms. You know, Tayyip Erdogan, who Trump admires, the Erdogan, who's the dictator of Turkey, which is now in NATO. They let Turkey in NATO because it seemed like a perfectly free country. He called to congratulate him on taking autocratic power. He admires that kind of leadership. He admires Vladimir Putin, who is a kleptocrat, who essentially runs an entire country for the purposes of enriching himself and his friends, who is a dictator, who is not in any way a small d Democrat, and who means to empower not just Nazi movements across Europe, but to undo the entire European and Western consensus. Trump admires them. So what I would say to a lot of voters is you need to stop thinking small and stop just thinking about the president, because the other side, they think about the whole big picture. Yes.
Joy, thank you for speaking so much truth. If my television isn't on MSNBC, it thinks it's broke. And I say that because as I listen to the arguments around Obamacare, I'm confused that the elephant in the room is never spoken of. The right can say, restore the doctor-patient relationship. Who would you rather have make your decisions about your health care? Some profit-driven medical provider or a bureaucrat who's following some rational regulations? And I don't understand why there is no mention in the entire discussion of it is not the restoration of a patient-doctor relationship, because there was no such thing, which is one of the reasons why Obamacare was so important.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The insurance companies are right in between you and your doctor. I had a doctor's appointment this morning. The first thing they ask you for is your insurance card. That is the first, not what's wrong with you, how you feeling. It's do you have a card? If you don't have a card, you are not getting any further. Mm-hmm. So not having an insurance card is a death sentence if you're sick. And the insurance companies are right in the middle. And the plain reading of particularly what the Freedom Caucus wanted out of this American Health Care Act, that they called it, was to restore the insurance company relationship with you, which was to be able to do whatever they wanted, to charge people over 50 5 times more than people under 50, to be able to not have to provide a minimum menu of services, no minimum mammograms, colonoscopies, the things that now we take for granted, not have to keep 26 people up to age 26 on the insurance plan without extra charge, to allow insurance companies to essentially be in the free market, to charge whatever they want and do whatever they want, because the whole imperative, and the Freedom Caucus admitted it, was to make sure that these free enterprise companies can make money. That's what an insurance company is there for. They're not there to care for your health, they're there to make money. And they want to be able to make more money. And if you get rid of the Affordable Care Act and take away the restrictions, the regulations, they can make a lot more money. Just like coal companies can make more money if they can just dump the stuff dump their coal ash in the stream instead of having to cart it away and dispose of it. The other thing I think people miss, and thank you for raising the missed things, we talked about it a lot on our show, the Affordable Care Act repeal was not about healthcare at all. It was about finding $1 trillion so that they could do a second $1 trillion in tax cuts. There's a rule in the way you make law, and Donald Trump and his team don't know a whole lot about lawmaking. They don't really know how to do that, but they're finding out that if you want to pass, let's say, $1 trillion tax cut, you have to show that you are not blowing a $1 trillion hole in the Treasury. So you have to find $1 trillion somewhere else. 2/3 of our budget in this country is social spending. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. 2/3, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, military TRICARE, VA benefits, 2/3 of the budget. That's where the money is. PBS is maybe 0.00001%. Food stamps is maybe 1%. The military, which is the most bloated military on earth, is 15%. 2/3 of the budget is your Medicare, your mom's Medicare, your grandma's Social Security. That is where the money is. They want the money. And they were going to take the money out of Medicaid. They were going to take $800 billion out of Medicaid. That was what this whole thing was about, was allowing Paul Ryan to do a $1 trillion tax cut, which is what they want to do now, but now they have to figure out how to do it without $1 trillion out of the Affordable Care Act. It's a sort of sick way of thinking about public policy, but that's what they're doing.
Thank you. I'll ask your colleagues to talk more about the insurance companies.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Yes.
Well, thanks for coming.
Sure.
So as much as I think you did a very good job of highlighting how, like, racial animus really played a strong role in the election and sexism played a strong role, could you reflect a little bit on class tensions, the policy changes of the Democratic Party over the last several decades, which has moved more towards the center as a strategy of trying to win a more popular vote, but also, in a lot of ways, some people have argued, abandoned a lot of the policies and the populations that we as social workers are trying to work with. But also the legitimate concerns and frustrations around the ways in which free trade policies have unfolded and how that has not necessarily benefited everyone equally.
Sure. And I'll do this very quickly in 2 parts. I'm keeping track of my time here. Yeah, the Democratic Party, I wrote a book called Fracture. That sort of the premise of it was that the success of Lyndon Johnson in passing the Great Society created an existential crisis inside the Democratic Party. And the question that they began asking themselves is, how can we run as fast and as far as we can from this man? How can we run from Lyndon Johnson and never see him again? Lyndon Johnson, who won overwhelming majorities when he was elected to be president, who carried forward the Kennedy Civil Rights Bill and made it into law, who is seen as the most successful legislator in modern American history. Democrats were like, we need to get rid of him. Because even he said, once we pass civil rights, we're losing the white vote. It's gone. And it happened. And then he did Vietnam, and it was really a disaster. And Democrats stopped being able to win the White House. And Democrats are singularly focused on winning the White House. Nixon was able to come in and convince Southern white voters to be Republicans. Reagan amplified that message. It became really hell for Democrats. And the whole thing was, how do we get away from those types of public policies? And their answer was what Bill Clinton did, which was move the party to the right. Co-opt the themes of the Republican Party. Become more like them. Talk about welfare to work. Signing welfare reform, punitive policies toward the poor, punitive policies toward minorities, the crime bill, punishing people of color, black and brown people the same way, but also neoliberal fiscal policy, which is the one thing that unites every single person in Washington. The 2 things that unite people in Washington, a war Anything that you have to do to bomb people, everybody in Washington is for that. You know, it's easy to get a consensus. And neoliberal fiscal policy, which is this sort of global idea that if you simply sort of empower the banking class, that somehow they will save everybody else. It's a version of trickle-down that Democrats kind of agreed to, too, during the Clinton era. That era of the New Democrat was a lot about moving the party away from the New Deal idea that the government is there to directly supply needs. And that had been the ethos of the Democratic Party since FDR, which is that you take the power of government and you supply on a massive scale needs. You supply them directly. People need jobs, you give them directly. You build a railroad. Even Eisenhower believed in that. That idea died after the Great Society. Because again, even Eisenhower believed that. You build a highway across America, it creates jobs, it creates commerce. This sort of idea of the feeder system of the economy lifting up the poor through direct action of government, Democrats threw in the ash heap of history after Lyndon Johnson. And so I think for a lot of what used to be Schlitz malt liquor, or what do you call it, Pabst Blue Ribbon, really not Schlitz malt, but Pabst Blue Ribbon Democrats is what they used to call them. They saw that neoliberal abandonment of their own sort of policies because, again, you can't divorce race from it because the New Deal, in particular, was a very particularly white working class fix. Because remember, in order to pass it, they had to cut out a lot of the help for people of color and make it a very direct charge into white working class America. And so these policies do have a racial component, but yes, there is a huge part of the Rust Belt. We interviewed people like this in Lorain, Ohio, who felt that the Democratic Party, and particularly the Clintons, Hillary Clinton even more than Bill for some reason, I don't know why they blame the wife, but they blame her even more, for taking the party that they saw as the party of the working man and turning it into the party of Wall Street and bankers. And so it was easy for an actual billionaire to come along and say, yeah, that's correct. He literally would hear Bernie Sanders give a speech and steal every line in it and give a speech. We found a huge Venn diagram between Bernie Sanders, people who liked Bernie Sanders and people who liked Donald Trump. We saw that on the campaign trail because they said that only those two were talking to white working class people and saying that they cared about them. And so Hillary Clinton, I think, made a massive mistake. It's interesting, and I won't go on of it too long. She had a decision she had to make when she ran for president. In 2008, Hillary Clinton ran as gun-toting, grew up in the white suburbs, Scranton, Pennsylvania, the hard-working white voter. She actually said that phrase, the hard-working white voter. She ran as that because Barack Obama had all the black people, and she couldn't get them. When she ran in 2016, she had a choice. Was she going to go back to being a Clinton Democrat, welfare reform, crime bill, hard on the black poor, get them up on their bootstraps, neoliberal policy, ending Glass-Steagall? Clinton did that. Glass-Steagall, the kind of crown jewel of FDR, Clinton got rid of it. Under Clinton, he signed it. Republicans voted for it, but he signed it. She had to decide whether she was going to be that kind of Democrat or an Obama Democrat, which was much more about expanding rights. LGBT rights, a huge change during the Obama era, but which a lot of white working class people say, well, what does that have to do with me? You're focusing on them being able to get married, and you're forgetting about me. You're focusing on black people getting health care, what about me? You care about trans people, what about me? And their attitude was that the Democratic Party has become a niche issue party. It's all about these niche issues for minorities, for sexual minorities and religious minorities, and you care about the Muslims, but not about me. Trump said, well, I care about you. He ran what essentially was an appeal to ethnic nationalism, religious nationalism, and economic nationalism. Easy win. Hillary Clinton had no answer for it, and so that's why she lost.
So where do we go from here?
Well, you see, I didn't write anything on there. That's the question. The Democratic Party is now, there's a tour that's happening where the chairman of the DNC, Tom Perez, is on tour, and he's the Obama guy, former labor secretary, is on tour with Bernie Sanders. So Democrats are trying to figure out how can they co-opt the sort of Sandersian message of, really socialism and sort of returning direct benefit to working people and add that to what they are, which is basically a minority party, a party of ethnic, religious, and sexual minorities. And how can you make those two things live in the same body? No one has figured that out yet. That's the next Bill Clinton. It's the next Barack Obama who figures out how to make those things happen. Because remember, when Obama ran, he did not run as the guy who was going to do policy that uplifted people of color and trans people and gay people. That is not how he ran for president. He ran as, there's no red America, there's no blue America, there's the United States of America. He ran as post-racial, as non-racial, as sort of the least racial, what they used to call the least angry black man in America. That's how he won, right? And he couldn't even say anything really much about black people until after his reelect. And then he just went completely ham, and he didn't care anymore. but I mean, that's the reality. So Democrats it's very hard to do, because if you stop talking about race, you lose the black people. And if you stop talking about ending neoliberal policy, right? And you focus on those white, if you talk too much about race, you lose the white people. So it's like, it's very hard, and nobody has figured out how to do it. And it's very hard. And so I think what Democrats need is somehow to find this sort of unicorn, this person, and not just the president. Remember, they got to find people at the local level, they got to find state reps and state senators, people who in their community can say to voters, whether they're white or black, I care about your wallet and I care about you. It's a very hard message to give. I care about your wallet, I care about economics, but I also care about you as an individual person. Very hard to do. I'll give you guys one person who actually has done it, and he's not a politician, is Reverend Dr. William Barber, who is phenomenal. And Reverend Barber has opened more majority white NAACP branches than any NAACP president in the country, because he's going into white rural parts of North Carolina and saying, I care about you as a person, and I care about you having this rural hospital still open. And that has actually worked, but they have to find a way, Democrats, to repeat that. It's very hard. Yes, thank you for your question. Thank you.
I'm a shameless fan, first off, and I'm so excited you're here.
Come closer to the mic.
I am a shameless fan,
Oh, thank you.
and I'm very happy you're here.
Thank you.
My question is about the judicial. I mean, aside from the SCOTUS, although I have this fantasy that maybe the other people on SCOTUS will like rein in Gorsuch, but who knows. My hope is that the judicial might be our only hope in stopping a lot of this crap that's going on. Like the immigration. I was wondering what your thoughts are. How far can the judicial go to stop a lot of this stuff that's happening?
Right. Lena Kagan apparently smacked Gorsuch down on his first day. He made like a snide comment about somebody who they're bringing a suit about losing their jobs. These are federal employees who lost their jobs. And remember, Gorsuch is Mr. Freeze a Trucker. Remember, he's the guy who's like, freeze trucker, and he cracked wise, and she like smacked him down. So I think they'll be fine. The good thing is that Barack Obama really seeded the judiciary with some really talented jurists who are there, and Trump can't just get rid of them. They're there. He can get rid of the U.S. attorneys and that kind of thing, but the judges are there. And so far, the most resilient part of our three-part democracy has been the courts. They've been spectacular. The Muslim ban stood no chance, and it twice was smacked down. I think the courts are actually going to be what saves the country. Thank you. Sir.
I have one question. You didn't cover it today, but I'm talking about Donald Trump's taxes. Do you think it would be revealed? And if it's revealed, what do you think it'll say?
I couldn't hear the last part of your question, but I can tell you how you could see Donald Trump's taxes. Elect a Congress that will impanel a House committee to subpoena them. They could do that. If you want, my favorite little saying, because I made it up, is if you want a better president, get a better Congress. I said it all through Obama's era. You don't like the president, get a better Congress, right? They could subpoena his taxes tomorrow. They aren't going to do it. If you keep the same people in charge, you're going to get what you get. He's never going to show his taxes, ever. Because there's obviously something in them that is so bad and so embarrassing that it's worse than taking the heat for not showing them. He ain't going to release them.
So there's no way the Democratic Party can make them reveal?
He can be made to reveal them by the Article 1 power in the Constitution. Article 1 names Congress. Article 2 goes on to the president. The Congress is the most powerful entity in the United States. They could get his taxes today. And if you don't elect a Congress that'll do it, that's on voters. That's the only way to get them. Or our friend Vladimir Putin, because we don't know what he's got on Trump, but he might have his tax returns. Maybe we'll get them from Vladimir. He'll get tired of Trump messing up and be like, you're fired, and then show his tax returns. Or something worse. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm already loud without the mic. I wanted to say something about maintaining a sense of hope. This election I was never hit over the head as much until this election about how much of a liberal bubble I live in. Living here in New York, I've also lived in California. Surprise. I've also lived in other parts of the country. But, I vote. I'm a social worker. I work with the populations that many of our policies that we believe in as Democrats, as liberal Democrats, support. What would you say to us in terms of what more we can do aside, signing petitions, calling our congressmen, voting, doing the work that we do to affect change across the country.
Yeah.
Because we talked about the gerrymandering, we look at that map and we look across like the more sparsely populated areas of the country where it's a sea of red and all of those districts are going Republican. What more can we do living where we live so that we don't feel like we've got this invisible, like, not so invisible, but you know what I mean, like a bubble around us?
Yep. I would say that the most dangerous thing to an autocracy are educated poor people. When poor people know what's going on, that's when it's a problem for autocratic governments. They can get along just fine when only the rich people know what's going on, because they can, pay them off, keep them greased. But when poor people know what's going on, it's dangerous to any form of autocracy. And so I think people who are in the fields you're in, social work, and I think I said someone earlier, Dr. King was essentially a social worker. These are people who were working in the lives of individual people, not just giving flowery speeches, but working in their lives. Right? Barack Obama started out as an organizer, meaning organizing tenants to stand up for themselves, to become empowered poor people. So I think that what you all do, without any politics involved or talking about any politics, is empowering individual people to understand how much power that they have. A lot of people think they have no power. They get up in the morning, they have to stand on their feet all day working. I've been standing for an hour in these shoes, and I'm like, about to die. People stand all day. They can't afford to get Wi-Fi so their kids can do their homework. They have to have their kids go to McDonald's to do their homework. They're tired. They have to work 2 and 3 jobs. They're exhausted. And so hearing somebody like me say, why don't you vote? Well, maybe they don't get the day off. Maybe they don't have a car. Maybe they moved the polling place like they did in North Carolina, moved them all over the place to make it harder for people to find them. Maybe they can't get the ID because they don't have $25. I think that what people can do who care about changing the country for the better is to affect somebody, to tell them what they have. Even if you don't have money, you still have power. You have a voice. You have a platform. Your friends are your platform. The people you know can be influenced by you. People who are poor need to stand up and demand the exact same assistance, benefits, and largesse from their government that corporations stand up and demand every day. They don't do it because they don't think they can, but they can. They really can. Children helped overturn apartheid. Children helped overturn American apartheid, little kids. And so it can be done. College students, so I just say, I tell people I sound very dour even though my name is Joy when I do these presentations, but the reality is that the American system has built into it its own cure. And that is an empowered populace that feels confident in its own power and that understands that the president is their employee. If you understand he's your employee, he doesn't seem so scary. So I just think we need to empower poor folks, white and black and brown and Asian, because they can take the country back. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. This has been so informative and helpful, and the way the information was presented was very succinct. And my question is sort of an extension of her question specifically about voting. And social worker head is like, what are the resources? What can I do to get people really to do this?
Yep.
And it's kind of an extension of what you're saying about empowering people, but are there specific resources?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things they've done in North Carolina is, number one, we need to have advocacy for people who have the time and the resources to advocate for automatic voter registration at age 17, which I think would be very important for making voting easier. There's no reason why we should be able to pay. I just did my taxes. You can do them online. I don't know how you can't vote, make it easier to vote. But so those public policies at your local and state level, pushing for making it easier to vote. But on a real granular level, if you have a van or a car or a truck, on election day, you can be an organizer. If you have a car that can fit 4 people, you can get 4 people to the polls. If people need a ride and that's the only thing standing between them and exercising their vote, give it to them. If you have $25 and you know somebody that needs the ID and doesn't have $25, give them $25. It's the best investment you'll ever make in your democracy, and it'll give that person hope. So I think people need to find small things, like, lobby. I lobby my kids' friends and make them register to vote. And then I feel like I've done that. If I get 5 of them to register to vote, that's 5 more people. I'm not telling them how to vote, but you got to do your little piece to make sure if somebody's coming in front of you, and they're getting services, they're also entitled to be registered to vote. Are you getting the right social services for your family? Make sure they're getting all that they need so that they're eating and sleeping and their kids are being able to go to school. All those little things that you do, I think, make the country better. You guys are what give me hope.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm gonna make these real fast.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'll be quick because it's getting late. So there was a video that went around recently of a college student asking Nancy Pelosi whether or not capitalism was an issue in our country, and she very quickly dismissed him. And I bring this up because it seems like when we talk about politics, the parallel conversation that's happening also has to do with our economic system. They're
Yep.
one and the same. And you have to talk about the fact that we live in a system that inherently privileges profit over personhood.
Yeah.
And it's a very interesting conversation because that seemed to be the direction of the conversation that the Democratic Party was having during the primary, which very quickly got shut down. And then the background to that is the fact that for kind of the first time, the millennial generation, so to speak, supposedly prefers a socialist or a democratic socialist, however
Right.
you want to say it, prefers that system. So is now the time that that conversation happens? Do you think
Yep.
it's possible to have that conversation in America? And if so, how do we have it?
I think we can only have it if we change the language. America is never going to accept being socialist, even as we have Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, a military that pays for your food at the PX. Like, we have so much socialism that we damn near a socialist country, but no one wants to say that or admit it. So I think you can't start from that frame. You have to, and a lot of conservatives, actually, to give credit, are starting to have this conversation around what do we do now that the bottom is falling out of work. That the idea of hourly work and piecework is going away because corporations are always going to seek the lowest priced labor, and that's never going to be American labor. So those jobs are never coming back. And then the lowest priced labor is a robot. And the guy who was almost labor secretary wants to replace all fast food employees with robots. If you go in a McDonald's now, or if you go in a supermarket, there'll be 27 checkout lanes, but only one with a human. There are no humans anymore. If you call customer service, it's not a human, it's a robot. So now I think that you're having, even Republicans are having to grapple with what do we do when 30% of the population has no work because they have no sort of skill to apply to work. And so I think we're starting to have conversations around guaranteed income that are interesting. Other countries that don't even call it socialism pay for the college educations of the students they send here. You know, I went to college with people who were on a full ride from their government, then they can go back and contribute without loans. So I think those conversations are happening, but you can't call it socialism or it won't go anywhere.
Big fan, too.
Thank you.
Can you tell, do you have any insight into the future of the Electoral College?
The future of what?
The Electoral College.
Oh, the Electoral College. Oh, I hate the Electoral College so much. It was just a way of having slave owners run the country. It's awful. But the only way to get rid of it is you could do a constitutional amendment. If you had like 2/3, I think, of states, I believe it is, vote to have a constitutional convention. Like, you could change it. Congress will never change it because it advantages small states, and small state senators love it because, you know, they represent like 1/5 of the country, but they have like half the power. So it's never going to go away by dint of Congress. It really would have to be a movement among states. And there are, I think, about half a dozen states that have already sort of passed referenda and things to try to get that to happen. It would be much more fair if we just had direct democracy, absolutely. But I don't see it going away anytime soon. I wish it would. Yes.
Just a couple of things. What can we do? Run for office. Run for your community board. I was at a workshop this morning. People didn't even know what that was.
Yep.
Start to look more strategically. See if you can't talk with your kids about going to school in the Midwest. If you can vote in more than one place. If you have a choice, not voting twice, get out of New York and go vote.
And by the way, a lot of those states are passing laws to make it harder for students to vote there because they know that that would happen.
And the other thing is the power of the purse. Go to your board of directors, you know, and let them know, the hedge funds that also support a lot of the companies that we work for. Have conversations with them. In North Carolina, it was the help of a lot of corporations that overturned the transgender bill.
Yep.
So there's a lot that we can do with, you know, having corporations who are run by people on our side and the power of our own purse.
Yeah, get small, invest, like if you do in your 401k and you have any stock at all in these corporations, you can, there's a certain threshold where you can go to the board meetings, but you probably don't have time to do that. But yeah, corporations also helped pull down the Confederate flag. Nikki Haley gets all the credit, but it was because corporations, including European car makers, were like, we will leave this state if you don't pull that Confederate flag down. And the overturn in North Carolina, don't be too happy about it. They did not repeal the anti-gay ordinance. ordinance. They fake repealed it. They also left in place a prohibition on any city in North Carolina passing an ordinance to protect LGBT people, and any ordinance to raise the minimum wage. That was sneaked in that bill too. So they got a pass, and y'all should let the NCAA know that you are not happy with the fact that they quickly gave in and went back into North Carolina. They are still discriminating against LGBT folks in that state. It is a nightmare. But so I will end this with saying I agree with everything that it was a great answer that we got there. That's what you can do. And I will leave you with one more idea that you can do that is really cheap and really easy. Google who your congressperson is and call them every so often. It freaks them out completely. A few dozen people call them and they change their votes. So be empowered. Thank you very much.